Okay, good morning, all. My name is DeRondal Bevly. I am a proud ACN board member, and I welcome you to our conversation today on brand thinking. I am joined by three incredible panelists who are going to walk us through the tricks and trade of how to tell stories in different ways in which we can do that. First and foremost, I would be remiss and probably beaten up and scolded at the next board meeting if I did not point your eyes to the screen here for a list of upcoming ACN events. The Association of Consultants to Nonprofits is a wonderful organization, and I don't just say that because I'm sitting up here as a board member, but we are a group of individuals who devote our time, talent, and treasure to help our communities thrive through the work that we do with nonprofits in those communities. We not only do work for those nonprofits in the community, but we join together and figure out how we can do our work better together. And I'm fortunate to, again, to sit up here with these fine folks. They are incredible practitioners, are also fantastic people. And I think in the world that we're in right now, to be able to sit with folks who are outstanding practitioners and outstanding people is a luxury that I think all of us can kind of embrace in this day and age. So before we jump into it, just a couple of questions just to get our folks warmed up, but also give you a sense of dealing with today. I want everyone to take one deep breath, just one. Now I want you to take a second deep breath. And finally, one final deep breath and make it as nourishing as possible. I do that, one, because I'm a very spiritual person. Two, the world that we're in right now is incredibly hectic, not only individually, but collectively. And being able to take that opportunity just to sit, take a beat, and just get ourselves settled for where we are and the work that we have to do, I find is incredibly important. You're in this room right now because of your commitment to making our communities better, and I applaud each and every one of you for that. What we've seen not only in the past days and months and years, it takes all of us to make our communities better. This is a community, and that's what ACN provides, a wonderful community to bring folks together. So again, you could be anywhere on a Thursday morning. You chose to be here today, and so I thank you for that. And so, wonderful panel again. We'll jump right into it. I'm joined by Emilio, Gordon, and Lidia. Emilio, we will start with you, my friend. Tell folks a little bit about your organization and what you do.
Thank you, DeRondal. I'm not gifted with that beautiful radio voice, but I'm going to go Michaelist as well. If you can't hear me in the back, I'm happy to use it. You're all good? Great, thank you. So I'm Emilio Albertini. My photography works involve three main areas. The first is I relieve the anxiety of business professionals and nonprofit professionals. I relieve their anxiety in front of the camera. I do headshots, and I have a very specific process where you come in nervous, you walk out with, with more than likely a great-looking headshot. The second tier of my work, we'll go to the third and then come back to the second. The third is events and live events. So nonprofit galas, corporate events, those kind of things. Also maybe like a one-day event, doesn't have to be anything too sophisticated, just short events like this maybe. And then the middle part of my work is what we're going to really see today. We call corporate lifestyle, but the word corporate applies to nonprofits as well. It's just that nonprofit lifestyle doesn't get used. So it's corporate lifestyle, and it's predominantly images of people at work doing what they do at work. So in a nonprofit case, it's employees serving the constituents that they serve, and those are my three tiers of my work.
Thank you, Emilio. And next up, I lovingly refer to him as the Gordon there. Gordon, same question for you. And those of you who know Gordon in the crowd also can use that as the Gordon.
That's bad.
As you can tell, he doesn't like it.
So thank you. Well, I think I'll interrupt you there. Thank you very much. I'm Gordon Mayer. I have a nonprofit communication consulting firm, Gordon Mayer Communications. I mean, first of all, thank you so much to everybody who's here this morning. DeRondal already said there's a ton of things, I was going to say a shit ton of things happening in the world that aren't so great. I do want to recognize that. And a lot of us have either clients or our own organizations that are looking at, like budget holes and other problems. So I just want to acknowledge that. Including some of my clients. When I go back, we're going to work on the statement for the newsletter about that. So my story is, and I know some of you guys know this, my first babysitter was a newsroom. My mother was a journalist, and she was also a single mom. And so I grew up, and this was long enough ago that the newsroom was next to the composing room, was next to the printing press, and the cafeteria where I could go on my own and get a donut was down the hall. And so, of course, I wanted to be a reporter when I grew up. And I did start in journalism, but I soon found my way into working at a nonprofit where, of course, everybody said, let's have Gordon write the press releases. He used to be a reporter, so he must know how. I did not. But what I did know was to go find stories from people who were affected by the work that the nonprofit was doing, and immediately found amazing things. And then bringing that back to journalists, found that, we would not only get our name in the news, but actually people would start to understand the issues we were working on. And honestly, that's what I still do now. I tell people all the time that I'm, work kind of like a reporter, but now my clients are the organizations. And so I work with them and I help them tell their stories in ways that, help folks understand why it's so urgent, why it's so important.
And Gordon, I'm sorry, the Gordon, forgot to mention that he's also a board member on ACN. And last but not least, we have the incredible Lidia. Those of you who don't know Lidia, I apologize for that, because in terms of infectious passion and energy and just remarkable, you can see there's some nods in the crowd. People know what I'm talking about. I'm just going to stop. Lidia, second question.
That's very sweet. I'm Lidia Varesco, Racoma. I'm so excited to be here. I've been an ACN member for about 9 years with Gordon. We started an orientation on the same day, and we're also on the Marketing Communications Committee together. I'm a past board member. I love ACN, if that's not clear. But for my job, I'm a brand strategist and marketing designer. I have my own studio since 2000. So I'm coming on 25 years, pretty exciting. Most of those years have been spent working with mission-focused organizations. I started out my career working with them, took a little bit of a detour, and then sort of came back to it. That's what I do now. So I work with nonprofits, of course, associations, higher ed. And my vision is really that branding is accessible to everyone, regardless of the size of the organization, your capacity. So I've been working really hard to make sure that I can work with organizations wherever they are. So whether we can do full-scale branding or I have other tools that they can use, if they're just getting started. So I really just want everyone to have access to a great brand and to really be able to put their mission out there. I love to do speaking, and I do some teaching and courses and webinars and that as well. So I'm really excited to be here. Thank you, ACN.
So before we get started, just a couple of housekeeping logistics items. Bathroom, there's one outside this room, one by the elevator when you first came up. There's coffee, water, and refreshments in the back. Our first panel presenter, Lidia, is going to walk us through some core foundational pieces and strategies for brand design. At the end of that, we're going to take a look at time. We may have a quick break just so folks can stretch their legs and check phone calls and emails and whatnot. We'll check time. We'll let you know about that. And then we'll go through the presentations for these fine too. We will then circle back for a couple of questions that I've generated just to get some thoughts going, open up time to and the floor for you fine folks to be able to do the same. We'll leave some time for networking, and then we'll get you on your way. All right. Lidia, my friend, take it away.
All right. So as DeRondal mentioned, we're going to start our brand thinking session with design. So we're going to talk about sort of what branding is, framework that I use for branding, some of those key branding elements that you want to make sure you have in place in your organization. And then we'll talk a little bit about challenges and solutions. This comes up quite often. A lot of nonprofits and organizations have similar challenges, even similar to those challenges that someone like I have, small businesses, consultants. So we'll talk about that, and then I'll show you a couple of examples of effective branding so we can lead with a little bit of inspiration. And of course, we'll have time for questions. So first, what is branding? So branding is how people perceive and interact with your organization. People often think like, oh, branding's my logo, it's what's on my website. Well, those are components of it, but that's not really the core of it. It's really what people think that your organization is. So I have a quote here. It's from Marty Neumeier, who's written a bunch of books on branding. And he said the brand is not a logo. It's a person's gut feeling about an organization. And that's how I look at it, is that it's really how you make people feel. It's that emotion that they experience with you. As I have it here written out, it's an experience that they have with you, the story that you're telling, and ultimately how they feel when they interact with you. All of those are really important elements of your brand. So this is kind of a general framework that I've created for developing your brand or refining your brand, whatever stage you're in. Like I said, I love to be able to help people along, wherever they are. But it all boils down to the who, what, why. So the who, of course, the people that you serve, people that you're working with. The what would be the problem that you're solving. And then the why is the reason you exist. And the why, in my opinion, that's the most important part. That's where I spend the most time. That's where I always encourage people to spend the most time, is really thinking about that why. And we'll see that's going to play out in the storytelling, when Gordon presents his portion, that why really comes through. So we really want to think about that. So the first part is the who. So that's your audience. This is pretty typical. Most people kind of go through this exercise of figuring out who your audience is, who you're speaking to. So this, in the case of nonprofits, we're talking about people who are receiving your services, people that you're working with, but then it's also partners, fundraising, advocacy. It's your team, it's volunteers, it's people who are just spreading the word about your organization. This is all part of your who. And some of the questions that you want to ask are, where do they live and work? Where do they spend their time? What is their job, their role in their everyday life? What are some of their challenges and pain points? And this is the big one. Again, you'll see as we kind of go through this framework, a lot of these elements are important for establishing the brand, but they're also important as you are expressing the brand. So the pain points, that's another one I like to call out, because that's a really important one to kind of think about and consider. And then also what inspires them. Because ultimately, with our branding, we want to connect with people. We want that emotion. So we need to know their challenges and their inspirations as well. And then the next part of the framework is the what. So that's the problem that you're solving. And again, most organizations kind of know that, but we want to dig a little bit deeper into, yes, there's a problem you're solving, but what situation are you maybe making easier for them? What can they expect from you? You can kind of start to think about that brand promise. And then some questions to ask in this phase would be, what services or products do you provide? What problem are you solving? And really kind of going beyond the surface of this to dig deeper into maybe what makes you unique, and how are you approaching this problem solving in a different way than other organizations maybe do. And then the next part is my favorite, and that's the why. And this is where, like I said, I really like to spend a lot of time thinking about the why when it comes to branding. And this is the reason you exist. So why was this organization founded? What is your mission? What is your ultimate vision? What is your story? These are some of the questions you want to ask as you're doing this brand exploration. What makes you different? We know that there's a lot of organizations out there that might be providing similar services. How are you different? What are you doing that makes somebody want to come to your organization and partner with you or work with you? And within this, developing the why is where you would develop your mission statement, your vision, your brand story, your values, the experience that you want people to have, and then ultimately what makes you unique. And like I mentioned, this is so important, and this is not just for that one time establishing the brand, but this is something that you will use continuously as you're expressing the brand in your marketing, your communications. So now we're going to kind of take the who, what, and why that we just talked about and put it all together. So how do we actually use that framework? So these are 5 key branding elements that I pulled out. And there are other things that we can consider, but these are kind of the top 5 that I think, everybody should have these in place in their organization. So we'll talk about your audience persona, your brand positioning, your brand messaging, your visual identity, and then your brand guidelines. So the first part is the personas. And this is where you really focus on the who. So hopefully you've gone through that exercise and you've determined who your audience is. And this is where you want to really outline who that ideal audience is. So you're, of course, looking at some of the demographic information, but you're also really focusing a lot of your energy in determining the values, the challenges, the opportunities, some of those things that may not be as obvious. And those are some of the ways that you will connect with your branding, with your audience. And this will really guide, like I mentioned, all of your marketing efforts, all of your outreach. So it's really important to create these as detailed as you can. And then this, like I mentioned, this will play into all of the other elements that we'll talk about. So the next part is what's called the brand positioning. And this is basically the who, what, and why organization. And we could go into really great detail of this, which we won't today, but
Those are the slides I added at like 3 o'clock in the morning.
Okay.
I'm going to flesh out your thoughts.
thank you.
Sorry.
No, thank you. Any interruptions are welcome. So this is really the core of how you will express your brand, is determining that who, what, and why, putting it in some sort of written form. And this is not a public document. This is not your mission, your vision. It's going to be on your website. So you can write it however you want to write it, but it should be really detailed. It should be clear, realistic, and honest, an honest expression of who your brand is. And this is something that you'll use internally, and it will guide your marketing and communications outreach. And believe me, this brand positioning, it is so useful once you take the time and you write it all out. I mean, I have clients that say, I look at it every day, every week, before I'm writing something, before I put out a brochure. It's really, really important to think about it and have this in some sort of written form somewhere where everybody can access it, preferably in your brand guide, which we'll get to eventually. And then next we have your brand messaging. And this is something Gordon's going to talk more about this, but the brand messaging, we're focusing on the what. So that's really, what you are providing, that problem that we're solving. And this will reference the brand positioning, of course, as we talked about. And you want to make sure that your messaging, you're writing it in your audience's words. So that's where having those audience profiles really clearly defined helps. Because I think most nonprofits, we have multiple audiences. We're not just speaking to one, we're speaking to 3, or more. And so this is where it's important to have that messaging, each of those audiences, so that you are speaking to them as you have intended. And you're not just doing kind of a blanket messaging for everything. And ultimately, authentic, honest, and real. We always want that emotion to come through in our messaging as well. And then next is the visual identity. So this is, of course, my favorite part. I mean, I started, just doing visual design. So I love this part. But this is what people typically think of. So you've got logo, all the variations of your logo, your tagline, your color palette, your typography, iconography, photography, which we'll talk about soon, illustration, and graphics. And again, this is created very intentionally and to align with your positioning, with your mission. We want everything to be consistent. And then lastly, this is my favorite, brand guidelines. Love brand guidelines. If you don't have them, please create them. So important for so many reasons. But if you're not familiar, brand guidelines are an overview of all of your organization's branding. So it encompasses the visual, the messaging, and it's really going to make sure that everybody's consistent, we're all on the same page. And I think most organizations, you're working internally, but you also have external partners. You're working with consultants like us, or maybe even you just have interns or, people coming in on your team. And when you have a really strong brand guide, that also serves as an onboarding for them. So the whole staff, the whole team can really get to know your brand. And for people like me, when I work with clients, that's the first thing I ask is like, I need your brand guide and your brand assets, because I also want to get to know them and what their look is, what their brand is. So it's not just for internal use, but you want to make sure that outside partners can use it as well. So keep it on a shared drive, somewhere where everybody can find it. Keep it with all the logos, all the brand assets, keep everything together. I'm a big fan of keeping your brand very organized. But this is where we kind of put it all together. So the brand guide would hopefully have your positioning, your values, in addition to some of the other visual elements I mentioned, like your logo guidelines, what colors you should use, those kind of basic elements. Okay, so now we'll talk about some of the challenges and solutions. So like I mentioned, I talked to a lot of nonprofits, and these were kind of the top three that always rise to the top. Multiple audiences, as we've touched on, not just talking to one audience, consistency, that's a big one, and then capacity. These are kind of the big three I want to focus on. So the first one, the multiple audiences. So the challenges are that you need different messaging. They're not all the same. You can't talk to all of the audiences, the same way. They can be found in different places online. Maybe you have some of your audiences on TikTok and some are on LinkedIn. Well, you cannot post the same messaging, on both of those platforms. And along those lines, they will respond to different things. So this is where it gets kind of tricky. People would ask me, will my branding change for all of those audiences? No, your branding, it stays the same. It's not going to change. But what you will do is based on those personas, hopefully you've taken the time, created those audience personas, you will just tweak the messaging for each of those audiences. You'll have that overarching theme and talk about the impact that is relevant to everybody. But you can create personalized messaging for each of them related to what is relevant to them and that platform they're on. So again, using in the example, something on TikTok is probably for a younger audience. It's going to be fun. It's going to be video and action and movement. And then LinkedIn, it's going to be a little more serious. Maybe you're asking for money or something. You're not going to be doing something funny and goofy. So really kind of thinking about how you can speak to each of those audiences differently that they will respond to. And then ultimately creating templates that you can then again customize, by the audience that you're talking to. So next is consistency. And this is like, oh my gosh, probably most of the clients I work with, this is their challenge. They're like, we're using 5 different logos. We got 10 different brochures. Each one was designed by a different person, doesn't have a call to action, doesn't have the right information on it. And yes, it's a challenge, because we're creating a lot of materials, trying to stay relevant, trying to stay out there. And this is a big problem because, like I mentioned, when it's inconsistent, people or the messaging is off brand, even worse, people notice and they're like, what is this? Is this the same organization? Like, I don't recognize this. The other sort of functional thing is that you can't find the brand assets. Like I have clients come to me like, can I get my logo? I can't find my logo. So you really want to make sure that you are consistent in always in your outreach, as well as how you are storing your brand assets, implementing your brand. And again, multiple people working on projects like that can complicate things. So trying to create systems and consistency, that's a big thing in my work life. So some of the solutions for the inconsistencies: use your brand guide always. If you're in doubt, go to the brand guide. Refer to your brand positioning when you're writing messaging. If you're putting something new out, you're doing maybe a new brochure or something, look at that brand positioning, look at those audience profiles, make sure they're aligned. And then create design templates. So this is a big one. You know, a lot of us are using Canva now. It's become very accessible for organizations to create these types of designs, you know, with something like Canva or Adobe Express. And creating design templates for those pieces that you use often helps so much with that consistency, as well as conducting a brand audit. So I say January, do your brand audit, but you can do it anytime. And that's really just looking at your brand, all of the expressions of your brand, and checking to make sure they're consistent and seeing how you can remedy that. And I do have a tool I'll share for that. And then, like I mentioned, you know, have a shared drive. I mean, that's just sort of one of those kind of functional things, so logos don't get lost. All right, so the last one, capacity. I mean, this is everybody. This is me, you know, not enough time in the day to do all the things. Maybe expectations are unclear. One person's doing everything. I mean, this is quite often in nonprofits. Or tasks are taking too long. You're spending a whole day trying to put a graphic together, finding logos. So some of the solutions are to create systems. So I love systems, SOPs, you know, not the most glamorous name, maybe call it a playbook or something, but create those systems for things that you do often. So in my case, maybe it would be creating a social media post. You know, what are the steps that you need to kind of go through? And this helps because this way, if you're the one doing it now, okay, that's great. But one day maybe you have an assistant doing it or somebody, another staff member. So create those systems. It will be so useful for yourself as well as down the line. I'm a big fan. I have them myself for my own business. Project management apps are really handy. I use Asana with my clients. There's, you know, so many other Trello. There's lots of other apps to kind of keep people on track, keep those deadlines in check when I'm creating all these different design and marketing materials. And then, like I mentioned, outsourcing. You know, eventually you might be like, I need a writer to come in and help me. Like, this is beyond what I can, you know, write myself. And then lastly, creating those templates. You know, that really helps. I quite often help my clients with this to create things in Canva or in, you know, Google Docs. But having those templates makes it, again, so much easier for yourself, as well as if you will have somebody else doing it for you. And then lastly, I've got some examples for you. I think, yeah, we're doing really good. So I've got some examples to show effective branding and what to kind of look for that shows that is using, you know, these principles that we've talked about. So the first one I chose, one of my clients, it's new moms. They're here in Chicago. I do a lot of work with them as far as developing brand identities, logos, their annual reports, their fundraising campaigns. And so I'm very familiar with their brand. I've been working with them for quite a few years. So a couple of the things to point out here about why it's effective is that you can see that they're using their palette consistently. And now I did not design their brand. So this is a case where, yes, they've provided the brand guide, which was great. It was very comprehensive, all the logos, very organized. So whoever designer did it for them was wonderful. So I familiarized myself with the brand. I knew that they like to use their color palette. They have sort of 4 main colors that they use, which you can see in all the pieces. We use those colors. We use the logos and typography very consistently. And then imagery is very authentic and mission aligned. And they do have photographers they work with. Emilio will talk about the importance of the photography because they cannot use stock photography. They need authentic images that are really showing what they're doing. So part of what they do at New Moms is they provide training to these young moms, workforce training. So they show them how to put a resume together, provide clothing for interviews. And, you know, it really comes through, you know, this passion and emotion comes through in these imagery, in their photography, which is amazing. Their messaging is also very consistent throughout. So in addition to the great images, their messaging is always revolving around empowering young moms to succeed. So if you see any of their pieces, if you see something on social media, you see their impact report, it's really revolved around empowering these young moms and reading the stories. Like, the storytelling is so powerful with their work that you really feel connected, you feel that emotion relating to these young moms. And then they also have mission-centered calls to action. So that's important too, is making sure that you have calls to action first and foremost, because sometimes in your brand audit, you may find you don't, and that those calls to action are mission-centered. You are asking someone to do something, and that's what you want them to do. That's what the call to action is. And lastly, it's making an emotional connection. That's our bottom line with our brand expression, is that we want people to feel something. We want them to really get pulled in by the story, to see those photos, and that's going to emphasize it even more. And I think that through all of their, I don't do everything. I don't do their website, but even on their website, that brand expression comes through, and it is so consistent. So they're a really great example. And then next, this is not one of my clients, but I love watching New York Public Library, what they do. They are an excellent example. They have done so many really, really unique and innovative things, especially like during the pandemic. They did some really cool things on their social media, but they are also a really great example of consistent and targeted and strategic branding, brand expression. So here I've shown an example of their website. There's a couple of social posts, and then I believe that's their annual report. So why is this one effective? So very similar reasons, again, we're seeing the logo, the colors, the typography, it's all very consistent. You look at it, it's New York Public Library, you can recognize it. It's not going to have that sort of disconnect where you're like, is this the same organization I was looking at? And again, their images are authentic and mission aligned. So their messaging is to inspire lifelong learning, advance knowledge, and strengthen communities. And as you look, like I said, I follow them on social media. I see their posts a lot. They're really strengthening that, both through their messaging and their images. You're seeing pictures of, this is so small for me to see, but they have, I think they did a post on the Lions. I'm not sure if I included that one. But that's something that is recognizable, to the New Yorkers, to the community. It's part of their community. And their storytelling is awesome. Oh, this is what it was. Yes. So they have a book. There's a book based on the lion. It's called The Library Lion. And they did a really cool post kind of bringing in that book. And again, it's like New Yorkers recognize that. That's part of their everyday life. They're really strengthening that community messaging focus. And again, making an emotional connection. Like we said, that's the bottom line. That's what we want to happen with our brand expression. And I don't even live in New York. I am emotionally connected, with New York Public Library after seeing their posts. And lastly, I have another quote from my friend Marty, the brand expert and author. All business strategy needs to start with brand strategy. So this applies to, for-profit and nonprofit. We really need to have that brand strategy in place. It helps to, instead of just putting things out there, we really want to have a solid framework. I hope that the framework that we've talked about today will help, and I hope everybody has a great.
If we're okay on time, I want to just kind of continue a little bit with a question or two for Lydia before we jump into.
Why don't we do, and then I can go, I'll do a little rounds for people as a way to start into mine, and then we can do a break after mine.
Beautiful.
Okay.
As I mentioned in the intro, you are incredibly talented, fantastic at what you do. There's a tremendous passion for it. Give us a sense of where that passion started and how it led you to doing this work.
Oh my gosh, thank you. First, that's very kind of you to say. So I started out, like I mentioned, as basically visual design, focusing on visual design. And as an intern, I had an internship not too far from here in the Monadnock building. And I had an amazing boss there who turned into a mentor. And so she sort of guided me on the path to creating my own business. But it's kind of cool because she had a lot of clients that were in the nonprofit space. So we worked with the University of Chicago, Conservation International, the School of the Art Institute, and I loved it. It was great. And then I ended up having other jobs. I did some work in the restaurant industry. I worked for paper stores. People are familiar with paper stores. I kind of made the rounds before I started my business. And then eventually I was like, when my son was born, he's 13 now, I was like, I really want to focus on work that is meaningful. I want to make a better world for my kids, do what I can. And at that point, I looked at my body of work and I was like, I've done a lot of nonprofit work over the years. And so I sort of went back. It's kind of fun. I went full circle. I worked for University of Chicago when I was an intern. Now I work for them again. They're one of my clients. But it's kind of nice. Like I'm excited about how this 25-year path, sort of took me from where I started, back to where I am now.
And earlier you mentioned different types of platforms and applications to help in the design process. A lot of folks out here may be, as you mentioned, in terms of capacity, lack of resources. What are some of those tools and platforms that you like to use to help you navigate?
Yeah, definitely. So Canva's great. Like I was scared of Canva as a graphic designer. I was like, what is happening? It's taking my job away. Yes, exactly. And I had a client, they're a foundation, Hope for Widows Foundation. And she said, hey, could you make some templates in Canva for us? And I was like, yeah, I'm sure I could figure it out. And the rest is history. Like I've been doing templates, now for clients to empower them, to do it themselves. Because realistically, are they going to hire me to create every social media post? No, that's impossible. So I sort of forgot what I thought I knew about Canva, and I looked at it as a tool, and it's great. So I always encourage nonprofits to use it. Use the nonprofit discount that Canva offers if you're a 501c3, not C6, but C3s can get it for free. As we know.
ACN is a
Yes, we tried. Yeah. But get it, use it, familiarize yourself, create those templates, or have your designer, create templates for you. And it's a time saver. I use it myself. I just, made some videos. So that's a great tool to create some of those everyday things. Now, you're not going to create your annual report in Canva, but, social media posts, presentations, one sheets, it's a great tool.
Awesome. And what we'll do at the end of all of our conversations, again, we'll turn it over to you fine folks, because again, I know that you all have questions. Just wanted to add a little more context and texture to her amazing talents, and really all of the amazing talents of our fine folks here. You?
Yeah, I'm ready.
Who's ready for some Gordon?
I have a question. So as we make this up in front of you guys, do we have time? Can we do a quick round? And the thought that I have, but with very quick rounds, you guys, name, organization, and maybe consultant or nonprofit. Name, organization, consultant, or nonprofit. Because one, obviously, it's always fun. And also, you've all had a chance to listen to us for a few minutes. And it'd be nice to make you all do something. And also, I do want to just recognize before we jump in, so get ready, name, organization, and if you're a consultant or nonprofit, you can't tell from the name. And the last thing is I do want to recognize there are a lot of experts here in the room. There's almost, I won't say there's more expertise in the room, there's more of them than there are of us. So there really is more expertise on your side than there is up here. And in fact, I'm going to name check Marianne because I know Marianne from Chapin Hall there's something that she shared with me that I'm going to show you guys as a diagnostic for storytelling about the stories organizations tell about themselves. But with that said, to give you enough time, you ready to start at the back with Kay Cooksey, our photographer. I thought you were being like, go ahead. At the back. And then we're going to just go right around the room. Something you can't do on Zoom. No popcorning, just the person next to you. Please.
Okay, photography, Columbia College graduate, worked with Gordon with.
That's good. That's it. 7 minutes. Let's time it.
My name is Kate O'Malley, KO Strategies. Identify a Key Estate Planning Consultant. Brandy Booker, It Takes a Village Family of Schools, nonprofit.
Anissa Wyatt, A&W Solutions Consultant.
Cindy Connolly Storage, I'm a consultant and nonprofit, for PDI company called Construction and Training, and then I have a nonprofit called Revolution for the Sylvia Nala, local studio lead,
Hi everyone, I'm Megan Moran. I'm the marketing and communications manager at Public Street in Chicago.
And again,
Hi, I'm Alia, graphic designer at It Takes a Village Family of Schools. So I'm Deacons, I am that woman movement nonprofit.
Alvin Gar, I am the one man. I will go. Josh Smigowski, Great Books Foundation, nonprofit. Dan Lindstrom, I'm with the Great Books Foundation, also profit organization, education.
Lisa Cherry, I'm a private consultant.
Lucy Gomez Felicia, I'm here to say community land trust nonprofit. Terry Chappelli, Big Buzz Idea Group, consultants. Yeah, Brad. Where we had worked on events, we help nonprofits maximize their maximum.
Important for our initiatives, consultant.
Whoa. Hey, whoa. And
I'm also ACN board president.
there we go. That's my guy. There we go.
Lisa Wyatt.
That's right. That's right.
Board treasurer.
That's right.
Yeah, again, the nonprofit planning company consulting to implement and work plan.
Hi, Angelina Villanueva, Angelina Studio, and I'm also.
For media creations, I'm a video storyteller and help tell stories of nonprofits and food fundraising. I'm Mark Christie. I'm the Senior Director of Marketing and Communications for Share Collective.
Hi, everyone. Vanessa Albertini. I'm a strategic communications marketing consultant with 31211.
I'm Gertie Casey, I'm with Lidia, and it's not. Morning, Shelley Zika at Arise Chicago, worker rights.
Morning, Valentina Parisi with the Federal Foundation.
Morning, Leslie King, with Bryn Mawr Institute and Organizational Development Consultant.
Ariane Casey.
You knew that was gonna go.
I am not an HBN worker, I'm monitoring factor with data and evaluations. I'm Bethany Collins, consulting for Impact, fundraising.
I'm Carol White, CN board. Run by CD White, market research and strategy consultant.
I'm Laura Norwith, I'm a consultant across the field of mental health and education, and my consulting group is Laura Norwith.
I'm Sarah Rory. I work at Care Collective and
Robert Mayo with the Woodstock Institute. We are a nonprofit.
PJ Shoemaker, possible consultant. McMullen, Shape and Hall Research and Policies.
can they add a DAPO? Or somebody put up for something? But can they add a DAPO development associate with It Takes a Village Family of Schools and founder of my own entertainment collective.
Shirley Shivachi, Seva Consulting. We do transition planning, interim leadership, and ED board onboarding. Oh, and Pat board, ACN board president, secretary.
All of it, yeah.
Melanie Stathis. I'm going to get ACN over in the beginning so I don't get yelled at. I'm ACN board vice president. I am also a consultant. I run a Confluential Impact Advisors focusing on data strategy for nonprofits.
Yeah, I'm an intern coordinator communications and also quality grad.
By 4.5. I gotta say, I am a Columbia College professor as well, and I love all of this Columbia College. Jonathan, so.
Am I the only IT person here?
Okay, okay, so good. We're all family. We love each other. It's all
You'll
good.
make it out. Wow, awesome.
Gordon, take it away.
All right. Well, thank you very much. So again, I'm Gordon Mayer. So I thought what I would do is focus on two things. One is to talk a little bit about words, and the other is to talk a little bit about stories, and maybe make the connection between why we need both of those things. You know how when you put together, three people are putting together a presentation, each person does their own thing, and then at the end, you're like, okay, how am I going to glue this together? So I did do a little bit of that kind of. It's probably later than I really needed to, but I did want to add on and to make sure I didn't say exactly the same things that you said, Lydia, because I think you nailed all the things that we talk about when we talk about branding. Things like, and I'll talk a little bit about personas and show you an example of one from a client of mine. And so I'm going to try. And also feel free to nudge me for yeah, that's what I already said. So the first thing I wanted to talk about is, and this is, you talked about consistency. I call this doing less. This is it's a meme from Forgetting Sarah Marshall. I have to admit, I have never seen this. And it actually started out as a gift, but I realized that would be a little distracting while I was talking with y'all. So, but I like to think about it. Consistency translates to do less for me. And what I said here is it means repeat yourself. And here's an example of that. A lot of people know, I feel like some of you know me well enough that you've seen some of these slides already. So just pretend you haven't. But my story, part of it is that I started out doing communications coaching for public narrative, it's community media workshop. And all we did was do communications coaching and training for other nonprofit groups. And so when I say repeat yourself, one of the things that we said, I worked there from 2005 until 2012. And we would always say, by the time you are tired of saying something is the time when your audience is just starting to hear it. And so this is a great example. I've been saying that for 20 years. It still sounds new. So and I think obviously partly because it's still good advice, but it is really hard to do. It's hard for us to do, speaking as, whether we're, communications or other kinds of consultants, it's hard for us to tell our folks to do. And of course, it's hard, even if we know that inside of our organizations. And I mean, I could do a whole other session on this idea of the curse of knowledge. I don't know if folks have read the book Made to Stick by Chip and Dan Heath. That's like an oldie but a goodie. Bless you. But that is, people talk about how much we know. And I think that's the biggest challenge to this consistency, use fewer messages, say the same thing more often. You notice I'm sort of repeating myself right now because we know so many different permutations. So you have to really add that additional script. How can I say the same thing the same way? I'm not going to, I was an example, Center for Neighborhood Technology. I'll talk about them. They're my client that got several stop work orders from the federal government this week. They'll be sending a statement out later. They had like 6 different taglines and mission versions of their mission statement on 3 different web pages when I got there. And, it was so easy to say no, take them all down. This is the actual mission statement, replace them with that. So it's not really hard to fix necessarily if you identify it. The iron rule is another example of doing less. Another, I don't have a list of these, but I'm just going to kind of rattle off another book that I think is really awesome. Somebody who's not here, Jill Stewart, turned me on to it. Josh Bernhoff wrote this book, Writing Without Bullshit, about 10 years ago. And actually, another intern, Gordon Air Communications intern, she got to interview this guy. She couldn't even say the title of the book was like her job interview. So I can't remember the title of the book. Is like, you talk about writing without bullshit? And she said, yes. So, what he says, he calls it the iron rule, which is treat your reader or your audience's time as more valuable than your own. And what that means is you're taking extra time. You're actually doing more to do less. Doing more to take out all of the things, like to make sure that the last thing that's left on the page or the screen or the post is just the things that your audience really needs to know. And that's also really hard. And I think you talked a little bit about thinking about putting yourself, using the right words, thinking about the right words as the words your audience would use. And we can talk a little bit more about how you do that. A couple other things that are just like, tweaks and tricks. If you go through your sentences and you take out all the adjectives and all the adverbs, you'll have better sentences every time. And, I don't know if like, this is like a journalist trick. If you look at every Associated Press news story, you will see very few adjectives and adverbs for just this reason. And it does make the sentence just better. Don't reword delete. I like in the category of like in the trenches and things that really happen. I think for folks, we all have a lot of reviewing that has to happen to our text. Almost everything I do has like multiple sets of eyes on it. And lots of times people have ideas better, things get caught, right? And things that need to get edited. I would say what I've realized in the past 3-4 years as I've done so much of this work, sometimes the best thing to do is just get rid of a sentence if it's messed up. Mm-hmm. And then I'm like, I didn't even need that sentence at all. So really just like at the level of tips and tricks. And I think you talked about like Canva templates is awesome. And I think I want to talk with you about some of those. And I bet a lot of people do. Anything you can do to streamline somebody else's nonprofit marketing guide has a whole training she calls How to Be Calm, Not Busy. And it's an acronym. I can't remember what it stands for. But anything you can do to set some structure. I've had clients, like Woodstock Institute's a great example of a past client where there were 7 people when I was there. And I think now you're more like 10 or 11. At 7, people can just ask you to do things. Everybody can ask you to do anything all the time. But when you get up like into the double digits of staff people that the organization has, or sometimes, like a small group, but lots of, like a wide range of tasks, if you can give people some structure, like how do you access my services? What are the things that you need? A request form or talking points like the brand positioning statement. Those kinds of tools are like extensions of your work. So again, this kind of falls into the category of another way to do less. If you can pick the places where the words that you provide have the most impact, you've also found another way to leverage the work that you're doing. And for me, what I find with my clients is that there are 3 places that matter the most: the website homepage, the newsletter, and I hate to say this because there's so much work, but events. These are 3 awesome places to deliver your brand story. I mean, it's also like to deliver the news about what you've been up to lately. But I think that really a lot of times it is the brand story, because what I often find is for clients, and newsletters are a great example of that. I'm a big email believer, in a monthly newsletter to just remind people what you're up to. But so often, for most of my clients, the story is like Center for Neighborhood Technology, stick with them. It's a climate, like they're working on putting green stormwater infrastructure in the ground. And you kind of have to remind people what that is every month. It's like, it's not big tunnels, but it's like gardens, like playgrounds with water tanks underneath for when it rains real hard. They're doing other things like that. Woodstock Institute is like, we were working on stopping predatory loans, subprime loans, like loan shark loans that people were taking out at currency exchanges and places like that. So every month, we're kind of telling the same kind of story. Like the details would be different, but we'd be reminding people what the work is. And so that's a great example where we'd spend kind of a lot of time on a newsletter. Like, it takes multiple days of multiple people to pull the stories together, and then a couple of days to get the stories right, and then a half a day to kind of make it look pretty, right? I'd say for me. And so that time is valuable. It's, time that's well spent. You can leverage some of that stuff to use it in multiple places, but these are the places to do it. And then the last one for events, I did an event for an organization last fall, and it was their 50th anniversary. And their state senator walked out, and the executive director told me the next day, said, when the state senator walked out, he said, I had no idea your organization did all those things. And so that was like worth all of the money and all of the time. So let me pivot from there and talk about stories. again, if you may have seen this before. This is a figure. It's at the Art Institute of Chicago. So you get the little school of Art Institute.
Happy now.
Yeah. So, it's called The Storyteller. It's in the American Room. It's from Mexico. It's from sometime between 100 and 800. I really love this. If I could make this like my totem, I think Angela and I are talking about logos. Like this could be my logo. If I could just use it. What to me, right, it clearly looks like somebody's like telling a story at the fire. To me, the lesson I take from this image is, it doesn't matter where you are and it doesn't matter when you are. People communicate through stories. And Andy Goodman, who's another former like nonprofit communications and marketing guru, says like it came from being a scriptwriter actually in Hollywood. Says people are storytelling animals. That's how we do. So this is again goes back a million years to like public narrative coaching and training. The first time I saw this, it was like I will never do this. It's so obnoxious. It's a real trait, but now I use it in almost every workshop, and that's why I had to pop it back in here. So you see, there's something, a phrase that's partially covered up. What do you suppose the phrase is? Obviously, it looks like community development, but obviously, I wouldn't be doing this if it wasn't something tricky. So the reason that this was done by, so here's why I do it, because look, you know that it's not community development, and yet it still looks like that, right? Even though you've seen it. So the moral of the story, what I tell is, by the time you've given people 15 or 20% of your message, they don't have a pretty good sense. They know where you're going. Mm-hmm. They don't want to know anymore. Like they're there. And of course, that's like a good news, bad news. So you don't have to hear the whole thing to kind of have a sense of where you're going. Bad news is they've already decided before they hear it. So, and this was a group, a couple of guys actually from Minnesota called Action Media. They've been hired by a foundation to do some focus groups and research on affordable housing. This is in the 90s. What they found as they talked to people, and when they talked about affordable housing, the image that people had in their minds was public housing. And what do we not have very much more of any longer? Public housing. Well, yeah, the affordable housing. High-rise, they're all gone. Certainly in Chicago, they're gone. So anyway, this was what they said was the story. Facts are meaningless. And for the first 10 years that I would do this, this was controversial, and now we're all like, yeah. So it's kind of shitty. So yes, I'm not real happy with like my storytelling, but there are a couple of other things about this. Let me come back here for a second. So this deep breath on this one. Yeah. What's sad is it's gone from being something we all know is true to something we're actually living, right? I mean, I think that's right. It's more profound today than it was even like last week. So I also, the past couple of years, have been teaching this class called The Art and Science of Storytelling. And one of the key things that we teach, it's for graduate students, it's at the University of Florida, all online. But one of the key things that we teach folks is stories are more persuasive than, like, I can tell you a fact, I can tell you, well, one way, community development until the cows come home, because it's not going to change how you feel because you're going to create your own meaning for it. But stories are persuasive, and what stories do is they use words to, people talk about, in our class, we use the social science term of narrative transportation. The idea that you read a story, you get connected to the characters in the story. They take you kind of like almost like on a journey. And when you experience it's the next best thing to actually experiencing something. So when you get back, I don't have to argue with you or persuade you because you've somehow had an experience that leads to persuading yourself. So that's like 17 weeks in a nutshell. So, there are a couple of other, but just like the other thing we talk about in that class is the brain science that shows like Uri Hassan is a researcher who's looked at brainwaves. And like when somebody starts telling a story, they look at the storyteller and the audience brainwaves. When the storyteller starts, brainwaves are not in sync. As the story goes on, what this person measured was to find out that the audience brainwaves and storyteller brainwaves sync up. And the more closely they found, the more closely the audience got the message, the more synced the brainwaves were. So it's like, actually, you know, there's some physiology and there's some science there. But who knew that we could have some science to back this up? So, all right, so, so, all right, so a couple more things. So about stories, there are, and this is where I wanted to try and pick up a little bit and make some changes to echo some of the things. Lidia talked, for example, about what's the mission statement? How do you know what the stories are? I actually really, the thing that I don't do, honestly, that I should do is like a more formal brand positioning statement for groups. Some groups are ready for that, and some it's like more work, and it's just more work than I want to do. No, more work. I don't know. Anyway, so there is this other idea of like sort of the sacred bundle, and some of these are almost like diagnostics. I feel like as a consultant, I like to use in my work. Like, what are the stories that everybody on the staff tells or the board tells about the organization? Just like to take CNT again, everybody tells stories about like the founding and how they started. And so when we're working on something new, we're working on creating a new constituent relations management tool for them. So I asked one of them, this like they have a lot of the generational shift. So like some of the old timers are like, oh yeah, we built our own CRM in 2005. So when we introduced it at the staff meeting, I started with the story of like what we used to do. And well, the truth is they don't have anything at all right now. So we kind of shift into like what needs to happen. So that's an example of like using the stories that they tell to kind of like make something work for the organization. Key questions. So I like the questions that these are questions that I ask all the time about in order to start to elicit some of these sacred bundle type stories. Well, how did you find this organization? Like, how did you get here? And people talk about their personal journey or who they knew. What do you brag about? Like what, you know, when you talk about what are you proud of? Woodstock Institute, you know, it was CRA was a great example, you know, when I got there. And how you explain what you do to your parents. And, you know, so I used to work for this guy, public manager. Tom Clark was the director when I was there. And that was like kind of his favorite joke. He's like, how do you explain what you do to your mom? And, you know, like that always got a laugh from the nonprofit because it's hard to explain what we do sometimes. And so one of the biggest challenges. And so when you listen to people, that is a great way to start to pull stuff out. And this is another diagnostic that I learned from Marianne actually is this idea of brand archetypes. And I mean, I've done this a couple of different ways, and Marianne shared generously with me a few years ago with the group Health Connect One, which is a maternal and child health organization, and they also had like completely like started from zero. They changed their name already. The staff had turned over. Some people were old timers. They brought in a brand new CEO. There were a lot of things going on, and so Marianne shared that there's like you can go online. You can take kind of like a Cosmo quiz. You have all the staff do it. And it says like, oh, this is your brand archetype. And then you talk with people. And I think it was more useful for me to understand. This is like a whole little mini workshop in itself. So there's some complexity to this. And I don't know how well you can see the image. But basically, there's this idea that says 12. It's kind of like a zodiac for organizations. I feel like this comes more from business than from nonprofit. But it's very valuable. You know, I find a lot of my organizations are, you know, like magicians are the kind of groups like we have this secret knowledge, we know how to do things. Lovers are like, you know, I worked with the federally qualified health center for many years and care. We were all about, I'll talk about them in a little bit. We had a big fight as when it came time to rebrand a big fight. People had different visions. Some people were more like, we're the lovers. We want to care for everybody in the community. And some people were like, well, we really want to get focused and like, you know, kind of came from a more like the business side of medicine, I'll just say. And they were both told nobody was wrong, nobody was right. It's just like a style thing. And so I'm going to stop there because you talk a lot about it. But whether you have everybody in a core group or everybody on staff, you could do that, like have everybody take the quiz and then the thing is like, it's, as I say, I found it really helpful I'm not sure if people found it helpful to understand this whole system, or you could sort of zero in and be like, so let me talk a little bit. You could sort of explain an organization's staff to themselves with a tool like this. And then the last thing is values. I worked for many years for this group, National People's Act, and they were all about like doing protests like with thousands of people and pretending to be like Robin Hoods at the bank and stuff. And so their value was joyous rebellion. And so it was both something that helped them explain their story to new members and also kind of like help them, to your point, like remind themselves of what they were all about. So I just have a couple more slides here, but I wanted to talk a little bit about, like you talked about brand personas. Here's a great example. And I'll talk a little bit about how this was done. This is Center for Neighborhood Technologies brand persona sheet. There's a lot here. I pull out a lot, and I don't want to spend too much time on it again. They were lucky enough to have students from the Booth School of Business come and mine their 6,000 to 10,000 person email list, do like an email survey, research the list, and they, sent out some questions, and they came back and they said, in a nutshell, you have 4 types of groups of folks in your audience. You have people who are like researchers, academics, who are like trying to understand climate from a research point of view. You have people who are like business entrepreneurs who are like in the business of green, right, which is a growing business. And then you also have, and that probably is the most important two, community leaders, advocates, organizers, residents who are trying to figure out like, how do I make my neighborhood better? And then lastly, you have people who are like elected officials, people who work for government, and who also like it's their job to figure out how to make some of them, how to deal with like climate emergencies. So they gave us personas, and when I got there, I was like weeks and weeks into starting, and somebody who was like kind of wore a dual hat as an outreach person and a climate organizer said, "Oh, by the way, I don't know if you've seen, they did this thing a couple years ago, maybe it'd be helpful." And I was like, "Oh, holy crap, this is so great." And I use this for that client. I use it for onboarding new staff, and they're so like, it's the first question they say, "Well, who are we talking to?" Like, actually, we know the answer to that question, and it like solves a lot of problems. And then the second thing that goes with that is, I don't know if you can see it here, but it's given us some guidance in terms of like tone, how to speak, what to say, how to use the audience's own words with them. And you can see, and then there are also some things that are like across the board, pithy in the top left corner, concise in the bottom left corner. So being short and to the point is everywhere. I mean, another example of this is at my federally qualified health center client, Tapestry 360 Health. We were working with, they serve a heavily immigrant population. And so when we redid the website, we redid it with the mandate that nothing was going to be over a 9th grade reading level. And we used Hemingway app. We used whatchamacallit, it's not the Microsoft built-in editor, but it's one of those like a writing.
Grammarly?
What's that?
Grammarly?
Thank you. We use Grammarly. Our SEO folks are like, you just use Grammarly for everything. So we use Grammarly to make sure that we were, keeping everything graded correctly. And I found that really helpful. And honestly, I find it very, very difficult to do. I don't know if y'all consistently grade things, but it's a great thing to do. We don't realize how easy it is to fall into it's really hard to not speak like a college graduate, I think. Mm-hmm. So I also wanted to kind of wrap up with a couple of examples. A few words makes a big difference. This was a client a few years ago I worked with, it's called Chicago Psychoanalytic Institute now. And when I started, it was the Chicago Institute for Psychoanalysis. So, they're both pretty long. Some people would say, did you really, why just spend all that money again? And obviously, there are a lot of investment went to, I don't know how much it was, I'm just joking. But a lot of the investment was in the graphics, right? And obviously needed an update. I'm pretty sure this was created pre-Canva, that one of the non-designer staff created the logo on the left. And so they did hire, pros to do the one-on-one. But the pros also did some other things like testing and messaging. And as you see, they came up with the tagline, human being, and I did look before pulling this for the presentation. That's like the brand expression is like 4 or 5 years in. It's awesome. Like their website looks great. They've integrated, they have all these different components they have like a treatment arm and a school arm. And you can see that they all have kind of like fit into this brand. And the colors are really a very deep purple that's really distinctive. So, but that's the thing, I guess, about the words per se is, all we did was change one word from a noun to an adjective. And it did completely change the personality and the brand. It updated things. So, it doesn't take a lot, I guess, is the point of this to make a big difference. And then, so I mentioned this tapestry. Raven was going to join us, and we could have asked her to say a sentence about this. But the Heartland Health Centers was part of late lamented Heartland Alliance. And they were spinning off as a federally qualified health center, which, if folks don't know, is basically like the family doctor arm of the public health service. So, people always talk about going to the emergency room, but if you just need your checkups, the FQHCs is the system that came from the war on poverty, one of the, like Head Start, one of the awesome things. And so, but when they changed their name, they had also kind of separated themselves from Heartland Alliance. They had previously used their back office systems. And so Heartland Alliance, like, you got to take it. And it was important actually for them to do because people were had appointments at Heartland Alliance clinics and they were showing up at Heartland Health Centers and vice versa. So there was no question. Nobody really wanted to change the name and nobody really wanted to spend money, but it needed to be done. And so this is why I think I was even joking in one of the posts when we were promoting this event. I said, it's like blood sport sometimes. And I worked with a group called Line Red with a different consultant, with a different client. And they, I thought, sort of had the best recognition of this, that it's really like what people are talking about when they're talking about their brand and their rebrand is people have sort of like, they love their organization, especially for nonprofits. Like, they subsist on people giving them money, and you don't do that unless you really love something. And so people start to compete a little bit, or they have like different visions. And of course, people want to express what that vision is. So I think, like knowing what I know now, and it's every rebrand I've gone through is a challenge. And I think, what my sort of lesson learned is starting with that at the outset and sort of letting people kind of be happy warriors for the vision they want. And putting it out there is the solution. If you have to do a rebrand, if you don't. So I guess the last thing that I had, I don't know if this is gonna work, but so I have a little bit, the tapestry I mentioned, a lot of the clientele, immigrants, folks, we knew we were gonna reach some of them with social media, we were gonna reach some of them online. We didn't do like a very strong email program to patients. So that wasn't gonna work. So then we had a consultant, VU Unlimited is the name. They were great. And they did all of the brand, they did all the design work. And they also hired this guy, just Steve, who was a rapper, who made up a song for them. And I don't know, this is how this is going to work. I'm going to just try and play a little bit of it. Let's see how that would be.
Yeah. This still might be done.
Right? Yes. I really want to do this again. I keep looking for an excuse to hire.
Mixtape for the young and old. The new era for dealing with Hacker Street 360. Everybody.
So. And takes the point about outsourcing. Yeah, I'll give you that. It's just like he came and we did like a clinic and it was just he, next. And that's it. So, hey.
It's probably the most unique brand expression of representation.
That's what I thought, hey, and that's why I want to share with you guys. So, just a quick recap then, in the name of practicing what I preach and repeating. So brand writing, what we said is do less and pick your places, right? And then using stories because stories carry meaning and persuade. Be creative like just Steve and, a little bit goes a long way. Thank you.
You both friends with Emilio. You can see this is why I'm quite fond of the Gordon there. Gordon and I go back when he was working with Public Narrative, and I served as the board president for the organization. So I've known and been fond of him and his work for a very long time. Folks, in our work, it's very difficult to manage the tension between facts and feelings. When you're working with nonprofit organizations, how do you help them manage that tension?
Well, I think the feelings are awesome. And because, like emotion is what people connect with. I think what I like to do the most with clients is like conversate and interview. So what I look for is I look for stories and depends on what the situation is. It's making me think about the CEO of CNT is somebody who's like totally got done. Like, imagine you just found out you had like a lot of zeros, big size hole in your budget. So thinking through like in a crisis situation, which is when a lot of times like emotions and ideas get muddled up, thinking through, okay, what does the audience need to know right now? And what do we want them to know about how we feel about it? And separating those, we were joking about being a little OCD yesterday when we were setting up the chairs, maybe we should try. But so that idea of can you separate those two things out and then figure out how to put them together and make a strong.
And then in terms of vehicles and being able to tell the story, a lot of folks here leverage social media to help tell their stories. How do you feel about taking all of these fine tips and using social media? There's so much noise now. Everyone has multiple platforms, posting multiple times a day. The water is becoming muddier there. How do you advise a client when using those vehicles to tell stories there?
So Julissa knows that we meet every week and we go through all the clients and we do this for ACN too. We have a great week. First of all, the schedule is your friend. How much do you need to do? Different clients have different frequency or cadence needs. Most people don't need to. You don't need to do it all the time, but you do need to do it consistently. Like there's to your point. And so what does consistent posting look like for each client? And then how do you repurpose every single thing you do on each platform? So you never do something for just one. Does that make sense? Did I answer your question? I think so. You're, so much work for so little reward, but you have to think about you're building sort of a vibe. The thing about marketing and branding communications is there's never going to be a day you're like, wow, that post really turned the tide. That never happened, right? So the point is you're like working with people to change perceptions over time.
Folks, just keep going around. And last but not least, we have Emilio Albertini, who I think has an incredibly difficult job to walk us through the power of storytelling through photography. and all that comes along with that. If you have not seen his work, I highly recommend you do so. Incredibly talented, wonderful eye, and our last panelist of the morning. I think you must.
I need to walk, it's hard. So, okay. So what I'd like to do is, if we can, quick overview of what we're going to do in the next 15, probably 20 minutes or so. I have a very specific process of producing on-brand photography, and I'm going to share that with you. I'm going to share it with you in a couple of case studies as well. But I'm also going to share with you, if I can, and I've got it down to about 2.5 minutes, maybe 2:45 at the most, is how I developed that process. And it was by accident, and it was through a personal project. And it gives a little bit of context about how I do my work, and it might be easier to remember. Couple key takeaways we're going to have: why we should concern ourselves with on-brand photography, characteristics of what an on-brand image looks like, and then finally, how do we identify a suitable photographer and image maker, suitable photographer, videographer, film director. But the biggest takeaway is going to be on the screen right now. And this is what I wish for you today. Please don't pollute your brain. Most photographs carry little meaning or intention, to DeRondal's point about social media today. My wish for you is to avoid this menagerie of mediocrity. So instead, defend your brand. Let's make conscious decisions with critical thought before we choose an image. And then ask yourself a couple questions. What's the message that the image confers? Is that image congruent with my brand messaging? And does it move my message forward, or does it detract? So that's what we want to get to at some point. And if I can, I'm just going to give you a quick history of how I developed this process. If you had known me in 2006 and I had said to you, well, you know, I'm thinking about doing a personal project, and it involves a friend of mine who's a Catholic priest. You would have come to me and said, if you were polite, you would have said something along the lines of, kind of off brand for you, and how do you have a friend as a Catholic priest? Actually, Joe Echo and I were friends, are still friends. And at the time that I did this personal project in 2006, we have been friends for 9 years. And why is it off brand? Well, I grew up in a Catholic, I'm a first generation Italian American, so I grew up in a Catholic household. If you count kindergarten, I did 13 years of Catholic education. But somehow, and maybe it was because I had swollen knuckles through a lot of grade school, I don't know what it is, but somehow Catholicism just never stuck with me. It never stuck with me, and I never connected with it, and I really don't know why. I did figure out later what it was. Several years later, I was very fortunate to have studied with a Taoist, and I learned Taoist meditation, and I spent a lot of time with that. And that fed me mysticism, spirituality, the idea of higher consciousness, and then I realized that my experience with Catholicism was missing that. But that doesn't mean that mysticism and spirituality and Catholicism don't have overlapping Venn diagrams, because they do. And I learned that when I read Thomas Merton. I think about one of the newer saints, Padre Pio, who did bilocation. It's kind of a cool mystic trick, and did a lot of other things. And so that's my Catholicism. So what's it have to do with Joe Ekpo? Well, Joe Ekpo is a living embodiment of mysticism, spirituality, and higher consciousness. And I had to honor this man, my friend, and the way I chose to do it was through a personal project, photo lesson. And if you're at all aware of, or maybe have some sort of access to Life magazine, particularly in the mid-century Life magazine, did these fabulous social impact photo essays, and they were strong. And that was, I read that as a kid, and that's my influence. So I'm like, I'm going to do that with Joe Racoma. But the thing about Joe is that he is a whirling dervish, and he does this, he does this, he does a lot of different things, and he doesn't sleep. And I was overwhelmed. How do I begin to tell the story about Joe? And so I started journaling, and I wrote about it. Then I took what I journaled and I condensed it down to words. And then I took it down to 4 words. Now, those 4 words were love, happiness, strength, intensity. Those 4 words to me represented what Joe Racoma was about. And so what I did, and how do we connect this with on-brand imagery? Think about this as your brand message. This is your value proposition. This is the message you want to deliver as your brand values. And so when I followed Joe for several months, when I saw love, happiness, strength, and intensity, I ran and I clicked the shutter, and that's what I got. Jennifer, may I ask you to trim down the lights and images? And these are the images that I produced. That's actually my face.
Yeah, it's amazing.
It was intense. I'm saying what we do. So they Jennifer. So comes case study. And funny thing is, oh, by the way, I met Joe. At this point, I'm practically a Martin Luther. I'm oceans away, from Catholicism. And what do? I end up teaching high school math for 2 years at a Catholic school. I was a little conflicted when I was a little bit younger. But, there's a divine intervention there. I get to meet this wonderful man, and here we are. So let's look at Catholic charities for a minute. And this is the case study. So the CMO at Catholic Charities, when we do this, when she asked me to do the annual report, was really a brilliant woman, actually, very smart. She came to me and she said, look, here's what we're doing. We're doing an annual report, and we're going to do it based on 3 words. And that's it. And I thought, hang on, I think I know how to handle that. And she gave us 3 words, and those 3, and the entire annual report, everything was based on listening, caring, and guiding. And then there's the cover of the annual report, and there's listening, caring, and guiding on the right. And so I walked around and I went to all their different programs. And when I experienced listening, caring, and guiding, I made images. And so we'll look at those really quickly. Jen, thanks. Sorry, I didn't have a direct comment. So thanks, Jennifer. So, Catholic Charities is kind of a Northwestern University Kellogg Graduate School of Business Marketing case study. I mean, they did it in a very formal way, but not every nonprofit has a battalion or a marketing team, right? And so, there are ways to adapt to this. I'm going to give you another case study. In this case, great organization that I really enjoyed working with, JCFS. JCFS came in and hired me strictly to do an image bank. And so an image bank or an image library, as many people call them, they wanted several hundred, almost 1,000 images that they could just put somewhere. And then as they needed things, things came up, they just went and pulled from them. And so what I did there is I went and, they have many pillars of services that they provide. So there weren't words associated with this and that kind of thing. And there was one particular afternoon where they asked me to just go photograph a therapist and a child who was, pretty far on the spectrum. And that was it. That's all I was left with. And so how do I manage that? Well, I took the same process, but sort of did a derivative of it. And I sat and I had about a 30-minute conversation with this therapist and figured out what she was all about and why she did what she did. And, I thanked the documentarian Errol Morris, the film director Errol Morris, for showing me how to really ask tough questions. If you've never seen an Errol Morris film, The Fog of War, and then the one with the defense secretary during the Bush era, who I can't remember, that got us into.
McNamara.
Thank you. No, McNamara was The Fog of War, and Bush's. I'll think of it.
Yes.
Thank you. So he undresses Rumsfeld, and it's a beautiful thing. It's worth watching. But in any event, so I asked a lot of good, deep questions. Not as well as you do, but I asked good, deep questions. And what I really came to the understanding is that this woman is driven by pure love. And she has a child, who I think a lot of people find difficult to work with, but she viewed this child like any other child and gave this child just pure unconditional love. And it just blew me away. And it really changed a lot of my view of how to do my work in some respects. And so, and by the way, she's a friend of yours, of Lidia.
Kids go to school together and she is amazing.
And so really what you're going to see is a lot of images. They just have to do with love. That's really it. Thank you. And the way she just connected with this child and did the work was just phenomenal. So that was, thank you. That was, that was an example. Yeah, I actually did hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of much more images from JCFS, but I thought I would just grab that little microcosm and share that with you. And the reason I share that with you is because it was very different from what we saw at cafeterias. That might be something that a small to medium-sized nonprofit might be able to kind of assume, connect with. Next time we want to talk about storytelling, right? We can't get away from that marketing, but I think what's important in photography is a particular way of telling stories, and that's a photojournalism approach. Again, the Life magazine approach, and that is a photojournalist has an ethics issue where they cannot intercede and stage something and then produce, and call it a news photograph. That just doesn't work. And so, but what we learn from that is that's how we get authentic images, because we don't really insert ourselves. We let things unfold. And that's that's the approach I use. And so think about using images. My point here is that these three images are triplet tell a story, but what's important is that they all have to tell a story individually. They must stand on their own to really be strong. And so we're going to break it down one at a time. Kind of, I think there'll be a story there. But each one has a little bit different nuance to it, and together they tell a story. Back to the JCFS, together as a group, they tell a story, but as we If we were to break those down individually, then, there's also meaning to each of those as well. So why do we care about on-brand time? Well, it's your first line of messaging. Typically, when you hit a website, you're either going to see a looping video come on really quickly or photograph. And so it's really important to have an impactful image or video or opening, because if you ignore that, there's a chain reaction that happens. A couple things happen. You have an off-brand image. Not only have you lost the opportunity to deliver your message, but now you have taken the viewer and the reader off on a completely different tangent. So there's a huge opportunity cost. So it's really important to have on-brand imagery, and that on-brand, and it really falls apart when your words are on brand. So you've got a brand strategy, and let's say your words are on brand, but then your images aren't. So I'm reading A, but I'm seeing B. How does that work? So that's confusing the reader. All right, what's an on-brand image look like? First thing is it has to have emotional impact. Because if it doesn't have an emotional impact, then you're not going to connect to it, and your viewer's not going to connect to it. But if it does have emotional impact, you connect to it, and then that emotion carries in to your organization. So that's really important. Authenticity builds trust. Power versus force. Dr. Hawkins' book is full of studies. The bottom line is, we know in our subconscious what's authentic and what's not. Sotheby's and Christie's hires big-time art historians to determine whether this Monet is real or isn't. Dr. Hawkins argues that any of us in this room could look at the painting and our subconscious knows whether it's fake or real, and he knows how to tap into our body, where our subconscious then telegraphs it through our body, and then we can even decide whether that's real or not. So the point is the subconscious knows what's real and what isn't. It's a great book and worth looking at for a couple of reasons as well. Differentiation. A solid brand strategy gives us a value prop, and that's our differentiation. And so our images really kind of enforce that as well. And that brand or that brand message or that value prop becomes our North Star using on-brand images. Storytelling format, kind of talked about that. We don't want to stage, we want to take a full approach. That's really important. That gives us authenticity as well. And then post-processing style. I can take an image and I can decide to make that orange way more prominent and tone down the cold colors and the blues in the room so that this image becomes more warm. I could do the same thing. I could tone down the oranges and the yellows and the reds and bring up the blues and make it more cold. So depending on maybe what you're trying to say, if you're looking for compassion and so forth, you might want to go with warmer colors. So that's something that, a photographer or an image maker can do to kind of enhance the messaging as well. All right, a couple of things here. The first one, I had this last, but I decided to put it first. And it's important. When I mean sensitivity, what I mean is I consider the eyes not as receptors, but as projectors. So how I view something informs when I'm going to hit the shutter. So I may look at someone, and though I'm not saying anything to you, though I'm not giving you any body language, if I start judging you and if I start thinking things about you and I start looking at you and I start considering you less than, whatever, than someone else, you're going to pick that vibe up and you're going to know. You're going to pick that vibe up. It's all happened to us. Someone walks in the room, they give us a little bit of a cold. It's a little icy. We know that, right? So if I'm seeing, if an image maker is seeing particularly a constituent, if you're a nonprofit that works with, people with disabilities, or people with addictions or whatever it is, if your image maker isn't able to see that person as a whole person, as just as whole as anyone else in the world, that's going to show up. So somehow, when you're vetting someone, you have to figure out in your own way how to determine how they project, how they see people. And you can't come out and say, look, okay, I'm just gonna have to sort that out, and you have to suss it out. But I think that's the number one thing, particularly if you're working with, constituents that may be, that may have disabilities and so forth. So sensitivity is the number one thing in my mind. They have to be conceptual critical thinkers. Look, this whole plan stuff, it's heavy. So you really want someone who can kind of understand what you're trying to do, the messaging, what it all means, and how to bring it all together in images as well. So you want to look for that. But at the same time, you want a mature style. If you look at someone's portfolio and there isn't some kind of consistent thematic or something that brings one photograph next to the other, or a video that kind of looks not so much like the other, but at least there's like a style that's been developed, then you have someone who you don't really know what you're going to get from that work. So you want someone who has a mature style so that there's predictability. So you know that after you hire them, the goods are going to be what you expect. You want to look at their portfolio content. If they're a fashion photographer, it may not necessarily work with what you're doing, right? It's kind of a no-brainer. All right, one more time. Please define your brand and consider the following. Make a conscious decision. Critical thought are to choose. I'll ask you also, what's the message that the image confers? You can go with my brand message. Does it move that message forward? Does it direct from that message? And lastly, while I do plenty of Zoom calls for my work, my soul very much needs face-to-face, in-person connections. So I'm grateful for you taking the time to come today. Thank you.
Anyone in this room who knows me knows that I'm always late for everything. But I made a promise that I will get you out of here on time, and that I will do. So with that, before we transition to larger panel question for you, you have a tremendous eye and just do beautiful work. You can feel the warmth, you can feel the emotionality in the work. How much of that is spontaneous versus you have a kind of preconceived kind of feel of where you want to take it? That's why I'm board president.
I can fix it. You have the branding. So the question is, how much of that is preconceived and how much of that is
Spontaneous.
So, I'll answer that somewhat conceptually, and then if you want me to ground that with an example, I'll do so. Succinctly, at this point in my work, it's all instinct. Yeah, I use the brain, at some point, my intuition and my instincts helm the ship, and the thinking brain is the first mate. So it's second in command. And so I use the brain to walk in this room and set the camera up so that it works under these lighting conditions. But then after that, it's all feeling, because if I'm thinking, I'm not in the moment. I'm not like right here, right now. And if I'm not here right now, I can't foresee and feel what's happening in front of me as that child and therapist unfold. And so that's really more of a feeling, intuition driven on the mechanics of of making images. Would you like me to ground that with an example, or does that work?
I want you to keep going.
Well,
Because I feel bad about that whole Columbia College. I said, your time to shine.
fair enough. Well, I'll give you two examples. So my wife Trish and I have my wife, and I'll make it quick. But my wife Trish and I have 3 cats, and the 2 orange ones, Adrian and Orleans, who we affectionately call Little O, sometimes get about this far apart, and they start squaring off. And so Adrian takes his big claw and he goes in and swipes Little O, and Little O doesn't have the opportunity to go, oh, I see Adrian's claw coming. I think that means I should probably back up a little bit, turn, and maybe parry with my own. No, Little O, if Little O did that, he'd be dead. Little O, the beauty about Little O is that he doesn't understand the past. He doesn't understand the future. He's just here right now. So when Little O feels the disturbance and the change in energy in Adrian, he knows to back up, get out of the way, and parry. That's so my meditation and my personal life mission and mysticism and spirituality and higher consciousness comes to being in the now. And there are all these crazy books and websites and all these other things. There are many people who want you to be in the now. And it's actually kind of it's easy, but it's not. And but so being in the now allows me to be intuitive and feel and then grab. Otherwise, I wouldn't be able to do the timing just wouldn't be there. If I think it's too late.
You said, am I the only one in the room who said 2 orange cats? First, am I the only one? Can't be the only.
Well, I was thinking that you modeled a great interview, like you keep going with the same thing, like, and you get a story, and then you're like, oh.
Yeah, right.
Good example.
So, first question for you fine folks. This is for the consultant brothers and sisters in the room. In the work that we do, there is this balance between the practice and making a profit and purpose. How do you navigate that balance? And knowing that there's going to be an ebb and flow, but how do you navigate that balance?
Very carefully.
So my business is, the way I think about it is like a lot of my work is like an interim communications director role. So it's like a retainer business, and I come in and what I do for all of my interim comms roles, I spend a lot of time listening at the beginning, and I usually have a pretty solid list of things that I say I'm going to do, and try and pretty scrupulously do those things. But the truth is, sometimes like people don't always know what the things are they're going to need, or I don't know exactly. So, like for me, those are really trust relationships. Like I trust that I'm not going to get like be asked to overserve too much, too ridiculously, and they trust that they're going to do stuff. They're going to get what they need from me, and I would say that it has. I mean, it actually so far 8 years that it has worked out really well. It doesn't. It's 100% no, but the thing about that is, like when I send a bill, and it's nice about a retainer as opposed to hourly. Although I do sometimes you have to do hourly. But like a bill is just like, hey, here's your monthly bill, thanks. And then the only answer I get back is a check. And that is awesome. It's how I run my business. That's like that. Yeah, it doesn't always work. Like if I work with sometimes I'll like work for an agency, and so then you do our checking hours, and it's like I do like a professional courtesy thing, or we're all working on a project, and then it's only fair like somebody is doing the retainer, but we use the hours to keep track for each of us. But like the trust that you're doing the work and that you're being asked to do the appropriate level of work. It's like I find that it's like for me, it's a give to get. I give it and I get it.
I would say over the 24 plus years, I've tried to maintain a good balance of smaller clients, larger clients with the budgets, according accordingly. So, and as I mentioned, my mission of branding for all, my vision, I've also tried to create different sort of service levels. So yeah, it's great when the client comes in, big budget, we can do a whole full scale brand development, identity development. But I know that that's not always the case. So there's a lot of other ways that can help clients. And maybe somebody just comes in for a 1-hour consultation. That's all they can really, afford in their budget right now. And we'll do that. So I feel like having a range of levels that you can help someone is great. It's great for them. It's great for me because doing a super strategy heavy project all the time, every day is exhausting. Carol and I have worked together on those kinds of projects. So sometimes it's nice to just do a social graphic or a one sheet or something that's like a little less sort of brain heavy.
So my work involves both in corporate and nonprofits. More of it is in corporate. I'd like to do more nonprofits as well and beef that up a little bit more. And I'll share. So from a finance standpoint, it gives having that corporate work gives me some flexibility and to take on projects, maybe at sliding scales, if I have to, that kind of thing. And the reason I do that is very briefly, there are 2 reasons why I work with nonprofits. To be completely candid with you, I believe that the social safety net in our society is an affront to humanity. And it's I have to look within my own personal, sphere of influence is how I can, how I can contribute to that. So in bringing first-class marketing to nonprofits, whether they can afford the full rate or not is really important. And so, because they need to serve a couple different constituencies, not to mention their funding partners. Second reason I do it, it's strictly, for me, it's strictly selfish. And that is, remember talking about the Life magazine social impact photo essay? Most corporate clients don't really afford that opportunity to do that dig in and really dig in, and produce 12 images of a therapist and a child. But nonprofits do afford that. And so that gets me further and further in. And that's really important to me. So I do that for myself.
Okay. Now it's time for the lightning round. Post lightning round, it's your turn. And you'll be the first one I call. Just let me know. Whoa. I do this in my classic Columbia, lightning round first, and then we'll pass one. How do you help clients navigate brand in different channels and making sure that there's consistency across those various channels?
So templates are your friend. Having a template that you can
Like a platform.
Yep, like say Canva, just to throw it out there. Like Canva has this feature called a brand kit, which is like a little mini brand guide, that is within Canva. So you can set colors, your fonts, put your images in there. So once you set that up, you can create your social graphics in there. You can make a presentation in there. So I think that's a really great tool for nonprofits. Is to, if you're not going to do it in Canva, that's fine. If you do things in Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, as long as you are storing the brand assets and the brand guide in one place where you can easily access it, I think that really helps.
Gordon, stakeholders, many different voices, many different perspectives. How can organizations make sure that all of those stakeholder voices are accounted for in telling that final story that the public sees?
I mean, the one thing that on a lot of conversations like this we would talk about, and somewhere in there, I was like, I can't believe we're not talking about it. We had a workshop where somebody stood up and she said, what's the most popular radio station in the world is WIFM. We're like, what's in it for me? And so we're like, oh, and what she meant was, if you have a good sense of an audience's kind of like, what's in it for me? Not that self-interest is the only thing that makes the world go round, but if you start there with, for each kind of disparate audience, again, like Lydia said, not that you're going to have a different message for each audience, but you're going to tailor the way you deliver that message to the different audiences, recognizing their self-interest, like so that it's going to connect with them. Because the first thing they'll do is like, why do I need to know this, right? Like, and sort of even this workshop, people are like, if you're a nonprofit, like, how am I going to use it for a nonprofit? If you're a consultant, like, how is this going to translate into something I do for my clients? So it might hit different. And as like when I'm doing some brand thinking, I'm thinking in those terms for those different groups and how to translate the message that the organization wants folks to hear so that it lands and then they are at least open to hearing that message.
Thank you. Can you find, for organizations that want to tell stories through photography, may not have the budget, but they want to be authentic? How do high quality images and what authenticity, but also knowing that the budget may just not be there?
Well, couple different things you can think about, and that is hire a Columbia or an SAIC grad who is looking to build a portfolio. But at the same time, it's kind of like, hiring an intern. You really have to really respect, them and respect in a sense that give them some real meat to work with if you can. And but vet them too. See what drives them. That might be one way to do something. Someone wants to build a portfolio and they're going to do it a little less expensive. You find someone who's mature, who's very good, and has a passion for what you do as a nonprofit. That's something to go after. I did 10 years of pro bono work for an organization that deals with grieving, particularly dealing with grieving children. Something very, very, very important to me. So they got 10 years. They got more than 10 years of pro bono, and so that's another route. The other thing you can do is, let's say you want to do an image bank, and you might need 2 hours here, 2 hours there. Pay someone for a day rate, but ask them, can we give you the money up front for a day's work, whatever you negotiate, but can we tap into 2 hours at a time? Because we've got this event that's only 2 hours long, but we want like 4 events covered, right? So how do we do this? So someone will work with you if they're if they buy into your notion. But I think like any personally, speaking from personal experience, like any funder or donor, they have to buy into your thing, your mission. What is it you're doing? So view them as someone that you need to convince that this is an important project and you want to on board here as well.
I would like to say, as a graphic designer, having that image bank is a blessing. It's amazing. I'm constantly telling my clients, please hire a photographer. Don't give me these photos someone took on their phone. It is crucial. So yes, people need to just establish that in their budget and create that image bank.
And I also think, it's never not money well spent. I mean, we're like, so and Kay Cookies, he's taking pictures for ACN for just that reason,
For our image bank.
Which we appreciate.
And let me be transparent. If I'm negotiating a corporate transaction,
everybody's going to line up when you finish saying this.
I take Chris Voss. I had the opportunity to photograph Chris Voss over the summer at a corporate conference. Chris Voss wrote Never Split the Difference. So he's a New York Times bestselling on negotiation, right? And it was sitting on. So my point is, if it's a corporate gig, I'm gonna go Chris Voss. As much, I'm gonna be a little bit tougher negotiator. If it makes sense to me, if it's a nonprofit, I probably a lot of other people are a little bit easier to push to the other side, sliding scale, ask. You never know what you're gonna get.
Finally, thank you to you all. Again, our communities are bright places because of you fine folks. It's not lucrative, it's not sexy, and a lot of times it just downright sucks. But thank you for just being honest. Thank you for the work that you do, because your work on behalf of others who can't makes our world a brighter place. So thank you for that. And last but not least, a round of applause.